Amid a violent storm and a relentless flood, Buddy, a brave German shepherd, finds himself fighting for every breath. Torrential rain, a sky shrouded in darkness, and rising waters turning everything into a nightmarish scene set the stage for a desperate battle for survival. Just when hope seems to fade, a mysterious figure emerges from the shadows. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Thank you. The storm had been brewing for hours, but no one had expected it to turn into a catastrophe. The dark clouds had rolled in fast, covering the sky like an ominous blanket. Thunder cracked through the air, shaking the ground beneath it. Rain poured in endless sheets, hammering against rooftops, streets, and open fields, turning everything into a murky, chaotic mess. The river that ran along the small town had swollen beyond its banks, consuming everything in its path. Trees, fences, even parked cars. Nothing could resist the force of the water. The current was vicious, sweeping away anything that stood in its way. In the middle of it all, Buddy, a strong and fiercely loyal German shepherd, fought for his life. He had never faced anything like this before. Just hours ago, he had been in the backyard of his owner's house, watching the sky darken as the first drops of rain began to fall. Then suddenly, everything had changed. The water had risen faster than anyone could react. His instincts had screamed at him to run, to find higher ground. But it was too late. The fence had collapsed behind him. The backyard had turned into a swirling pool of muddy water. In a panic, Buddy had tried to leap onto the porch, but the force of the flood had been too strong, knocking him off balance. In seconds, he was being carried away, tumbling and twisting in the raging current. Now he was alone, fighting against the relentless flood. His paws scraped desperately against submerged debris, searching for something, anything to hold on to. The water was freezing, and every muscle in his body burned from the struggle. His lungs heaved as he gasped for air, his ears pinned back against his soaked fur. The rain blinded him, making it impossible to see where he was going. Each time he tried to push himself forward, another wave knocked him back, threatening to drag him under. Then his body slammed against something solid, a broken wooden fence, half submerged in the water. Buddy scrambled, digging his claws into the slippery wood, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull himself up. For a moment he stayed there, panting heavily, his body shivering from exhaustion. The water still roared beneath him, crashing against the fence, trying to pry him away. But Buddy held on. He let out a weak bark, his voice barely audible over the storm. His ears twitched, straining to hear anything besides the howling wind and the furious river. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sign of his owner. His heart pounded. Was he truly alone? Had everyone been forced to evacuate, leaving him behind? Another crack of thunder rumbled through the air, followed by a gust of wind that nearly knocked him off his perch. Buddy let out another desperate bark, but the storm swallowed it whole. Then a sound. At first, it was barely noticeable against the storm's fury, but then it grew louder. Footsteps, rushing, splashing through the water. Someone was coming. Buddy's ears perked up, his eyes scanning the darkness. A figure appeared in the distance, moving against the flood. But who was it? And more importantly, were they too late? The storm showed no mercy. The wind howled through the trees, bending them until they nearly snapped. The floodwaters churned with an unstoppable force, devouring everything in their path. The sky, once a deep shade of blue, had turned an inky black, illuminated only by brief flashes of lightning that tore across the heavens. Buddy's paws trembled against the slick wood beneath him. His muscles ached, his body frozen from the relentless downpour. His ears twitched at the sound of footsteps splashing through the water, growing louder with each second. Someone was out there. His heart pounded in his chest as he forced his tired body to stay alert. Through the rain and darkness, a silhouette emerged, moving fast, pushing against the current with determination. The figure was human, their form partially obscured by the storm. They carried a flashlight, its beam slicing through the rain in frantic sweeps. "Hold on, boy," a voice called out. Buddy's ears perked up. He recognized that voice. It was Logan, the firefighter who often visited his owner's house. He had played with Buddy before, tossing a ball in the yard, rubbing his ears, always calling him a good boy. But now Logan wasn't smiling. He was drenched, fighting against the flood, his face tense with urgency. Buddy let out a bark, his strongest one yet. "I see you," Logan shouted, pushing forward. The water was waist deep, the current pulling against him like invisible hands trying to drag him down. He struggled to keep his footing, his boots slipping on the submerged ground. Each step was a battle. Buddy shifted his weight, his paws barely gripping the wooden fence that had become his fragile lifeline. The fence groaned under the pressure of the water, creaking and bending. If it broke apart, he would be swept away again. Logan reached the edge of the wreckage and stretched out a hand. "Come on, Buddy, I've got you." But Buddy couldn't move. His legs were locked in place, frozen by exhaustion and fear. He had been fighting for so long, barely keeping his head above water. His instincts screamed at him to trust Logan, to make the jump. But the river was too strong. Logan took another step forward. The water surged around him, nearly knocking him over. He gritted his teeth, pushing forward despite the risk. "Come on, Buddy," he urged again, his hand reaching as far as it could. "You have to jump. I won't let go," Buddy whimpered. His body felt heavy, drained of strength. But something in Logan's voice, the unwavering confidence, the promise, ignited something deep inside him. Summoning the last of his energy, Buddy crouched low, tensing his muscles. He leaped. For a split second, time slowed. His body soared through the air, his soaked fur glistening under a flash of lightning. Logan lunged forward, arms outstretched. Their bodies collided. Logan caught Buddy midair, his hands gripping the dog's wet fur. But the force of the jump, combined with the powerful current, sent them both tumbling backward into the flood. The world spun. Water rushed over them. Buddy gasped as he plunged into the freezing depths, his limbs thrashing. He felt Logan's grip tighten around him, pulling him upward, fighting against the river's merciless grip. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. Logan held on to Buddy with one arm, while the other fought to keep them both afloat. The current pulled them downstream, sending them crashing into debris. "We're not done yet, Buddy," Logan panted, his arms burning with effort. A few meters ahead, the remains of a partially submerged truck jutted out from the water. It was their only chance. Kicking against the current, Logan steered them toward it, gritting his teeth as another wave slammed into them. He could feel Buddy struggling, his body shaking, but the dog refused to give up. With one final push, they reached the truck. Logan grabbed onto the side mirror, holding on for dear life as the flood raged around them. Buddy clawed his way up onto the hood, collapsing from exhaustion. For a moment, they just breathed. Logan glanced around, his mind racing. The water was still rising. They were still trapped. And the worst part? The truck was starting to move. Logan's stomach twisted. The current was too strong. The truck wasn't stable. It could be swept away at any moment. Buddy lifted his head, his tired eyes locking on to Logan's. They weren't safe yet, and they were running out of time. The storm was relentless. The sky, a chaotic swirl of black and gray, rumbled with fury as lightning slashed across the horizon. Sheets of rain continued to hammer down, merging with the deafening roar of the flood. Logan's fingers dug into the truck's side mirror, his knuckles white from the strain. His breath was heavy, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he fought against exhaustion. The water was up to his shoulders now, swirling violently around him, trying to pry him away from the only thing keeping him alive. Above him, Buddy lay sprawled across the hood of the truck, his soaked fur clinging to his trembling body. His breasts were shallow, his ears flattened against his head, his muscles burned from the endless struggle. But he refused to close his eyes. They had made it this far, but for how much longer? Logan tilted his head back, scanning the area. The town was almost unrecognizable beneath the flood. Houses stood partially submerged, their rooftops barely peeking above the water. Debris, wooden planks, trash cans, even furniture drifted past them, swept away by the raging current. Then his worst fear became reality. The truck shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight tilt, a faint groan of metal under stress. But Logan felt it. The current was pulling the vehicle inch by inch, dragging it into the deeper part of the flood. His pulse spiked. "Buddy!" Logan shouted, gripping the truck with everything he had. "We have to move! Now!" Buddy lifted his head, his eyes filled with exhaustion. But when he saw fear in Logan's face, his body tensed. The truck gave another lurch. The water swirled around the tires, lifting them from the ground. It was about to be carried away. Logan's mind raced. They needed something, anything, to hold on to before they were swept even further into the flood. Then he saw it. About 50 feet away, a streetlight pole still stood, its base partially submerged. It was their only chance. If they could reach it, they could climb to safety. But they had to jump, and they had to jump now. Logan turned back to Buddy. "Listen to me, Buddy," he said, his voice steady despite the panic inside him. "I need you to jump with me, okay? We're gonna swim to that pole. You got this." Buddy stared at him, his ears twitching. Then, as if understanding, he pushed himself up. The truck let out a deep metallic groan. It was moving. "Go!" Logan yelled. Buddy leaped. His legs, though weak, propelled him forward, straight into the freezing current. His head barely stayed above water as the river's force tried to drag him down. Logan launched himself after him, his arms slicing through the water. The moment he hit the current, it felt like 1,000 invisible hands grabbed him, pulling him in every direction. His limbs burned as he fought against it, pushing toward Buddy, pushing toward survival. Buddy was ahead of him, paddling with everything he had, his eyes locked onto the streetlight pole. Logan gritted his teeth. He could barely keep his head up, but he had to reach Buddy. Then the unthinkable happened. A massive wave of debris came crashing down the river. A fallen tree. Logan's eyes widened. "Buddy, watch out!" But it was too late. The tree slammed into Buddy. The impact sent him spinning underwater. Logan's heart nearly stopped. "Buddy!" he roared. He dove. The water swallowed him whole, the world turning dark and silent. His eyes burned, searching frantically. Buddy was there, struggling against the force of the current, his paws flailing as he tried to break free from the tangled branches. Logan kicked forward, ignoring the fire in his lungs. His hands shot out, grabbing Buddy's collar. With all his strength, he yanked him free. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. Buddy coughed, spitting out water, but he was still moving. The streetlight pole was 10 feet away. "Almost there," Logan panted, pushing them forward. His muscles screamed for relief, but he refused to stop. One last stroke, one last kick. His fingers closed around the pole. He pulled himself up, then grabbed Buddy, hoisting him onto the base. They had made it. Logan collapsed against the pole, his body shaking, his breath ragged. Buddy slumped beside him, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The storm raged on around them, the floodwaters still churning below. But they were safe, for now. Logan let his head fall back, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he turned to Buddy. "You're one hell of a fighter, Buddy," he murmured. Buddy, still trembling, lifted his head and licked Logan's face. Despite everything, despite the cold, the exhaustion, the terror, Logan let out a weak chuckle. They weren't out of danger yet, but they were alive. And as long as they were together, they still had a chance. The storm showed no signs of mercy. The sky remained an endless abyss of swirling black clouds, flashing with streaks of lightning that lit up the chaos below. The flood continued to rage, swallowing everything in its path. Logan clung to the cold, slick metal of the streetlight pole, his breath still coming in ragged gasps. His body ached from the brutal struggle against the current. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Beside him, Buddy lay sprawled across the narrow base of the pole, his soaked fur clinging to his ribs. His paws trembled, his breath uneven. He had been fighting for hours. Logan placed a hand on Buddy's damp coat. "Hang in there, Buddy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Buddy's ears twitched slightly in response, but he didn't move much. Logan clenched his jaw. They had made it this far, but the floodwaters were still rising. If they didn't find a way out soon, their refuge would be underwater. He glanced around, searching for any sign of rescue. The town was unrecognizable, submerged in a swirling ocean of destruction. Buildings stood like half-sunken tombstones. Their windows shattered, doors ripped off their hinges. There were no sirens, no helicopters, no boats navigating through the wreckage. They were completely alone. A wave of cold dread settled in Logan's chest. They couldn't wait for help. If they stayed here much longer, they would either drown or get swept away again. They had to move. Logan turned to Buddy. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice filled with determination. Buddy barely lifted his head. His body was drained, his strength nearly gone. Logan exhaled sharply. He had to think fast. They needed higher ground, something above the floodwaters. Then through the pouring rain, he spotted it, a rooftop. About 30 yards away, the remains of a hardware store stood, its upper level barely above the flood. If they could get to it, they'd have a real chance of survival. Logan's stomach twisted. 30 yards. In calm waters, it would have been an easy swim. But in this, the current was still vicious, pulling everything under. It was a gamble, but they had no other choice. He turned to Buddy, placing a firm hand on his soaked fur. "I need you to trust me, okay?" Buddy's eyes, though exhausted, locked onto Logan's. There was no hesitation, no fear, just trust. Logan gave a nod. "All right, we're doing this." He wrapped an arm tightly around Buddy's torso. Then with a deep breath, he jumped. The cold hit him like a punch to the chest. The flood swallowed them whole, dragging them down into the abyss. Logan kicked desperately, fighting his way back to the surface. His arm tightened around Buddy, holding him above the water. The current was stronger than before, pushing against them, trying to pull them away. But Logan refused to let go. He kicked harder, gritting his teeth against the pain, forcing himself forward. Every stroke felt like lifting bricks. His body screamed for relief, but he wouldn't stop. Not now, not when they were so close. Buddy, despite his exhaustion, paddled weakly alongside him, his instincts kicking in. The two of them fought together, side by side, against the impossible. The rooftop loomed ahead, 10 yards, 5 yards, almost there. Then, without warning, something slammed into them. A piece of floating debris, a wooden pallet, spinning in the current like a weapon. It hit Logan's side with full force. Pain exploded through his ribs. His grip on Buddy slipped. He gasped, his body going numb for a split second. And in that moment, Buddy was pulled away. "No!" Logan roared, his heart stopping. He twisted, reaching for Buddy, but the river had already separated them. Buddy tumbled deeper into the flood, disappearing beneath the waves. Logan's blood ran cold. He had lost him. Number rage ignited inside him, overriding his pain. With one final desperate surge of strength, Logan lunged forward, fighting the water with everything he had. He dove. Darkness swallowed him. The river was endless, swirling, chaotic. His lungs burned, his eyes stung, but he didn't stop. He wouldn't lose Buddy, not like this. Then through the murky water, he saw him. Buddy was there, struggling against the current, his paws barely moving. He was drowning. Logan reached out, his fingers closing around Buddy's collar, and with every last ounce of strength, he pulled him up. They burst through the surface, gasping for air. The rooftop was right in front of them. Summoning the last of his strength, Logan kicked toward it, dragging Buddy with him. His hands grasped the edge of the building, his muscles burned, his body screamed. But he lifted Buddy first, pushing the dog onto the rooftop. Then with a final push, he climbed up after him. They collapsed together, side by side on solid ground. The storm still raged around them, the flood still surged below. But they had made it, they had survived. Logan turned his head toward Buddy, barely able to breathe. Buddy, drenched and trembling, looked back at him, and then slowly, his tail wagged. Logan let out a breathless laugh. They weren't out of danger yet, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. They had won this battle, and together they would make it through the rest. The storm still raged on, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Logan and Buddy had solid ground beneath them. The rooftop was small, barely wide enough to hold them both. The hardware store beneath them was still partially submerged, the flood waters swirling angrily below, consuming everything in their path. Logan lay flat on his back, his chest heaving, every muscle in his body screaming for rest. Beside him, Buddy trembled violently, his soaked fur clinging to his thin frame. His breaths were uneven, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. Logan turned his head, reaching out to run his fingers through Buddy's drenched fur. "We did it, Buddy," he murmured. "We made it." Buddy let out a weak whimper, his tail twitching ever so slightly. Logan smiled despite the pain radiating through his body. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they were safe. But then a sound, a deep metallic groan. Logan's stomach dropped. The building shuddered beneath them. Number Logan breathed, pushing himself up. The rooftop lurched. The hardware store was collapsing. Logan's heart slammed against his ribs. They had seconds, maybe less. "Buddy, move!" he yelled. But before he could react, the roof gave way. Logan and Buddy plummeted. The world spun into chaos. Logan barely had time to register the feeling of weightlessness before his back slammed into debris. Pain exploded through his body. His vision blurred from the impact. Somewhere in the darkness, he heard Buddy yelp. "Buddy!" Logan shouted, his voice raw with panic. A second later, water engulfed him. Cold, unrelenting, suffocating. Logan's lungs burned as he twisted, kicking upward, fighting against the wreckage and the swirling flood. His fingers clawed through the darkness, desperately searching. Then, fur. His hand closed around Buddy's collar. Logan kicked, using every ounce of strength left in his battered body. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. The store had collapsed around them, its walls crumbling into the flood. Debris floated everywhere. Chunks of metal, shattered glass, broken shelves, and the water was still rising. Logan coughed, forcing air back into his burning lungs. "We're not done yet, Buddy," he panted. Pulling Buddy close, they had to find higher ground. Again. Logan scanned the area, his vision hazy, his thoughts racing. Then through the darkness, he saw it. A water tower. It stood just beyond the ruins, its ladder still intact, rising high above the flood. It was their only chance. Logan's grip on Buddy tightened. "One last push, boy. We can do this." Buddy was exhausted, his body barely responding. But when Logan kicked forward, Buddy followed, his instincts refusing to give up. Stroke by stroke, they fought against the current. The water tower grew closer. 20 feet, 10 feet, almost there. Then, a shadow moved in the water. Logan's breath hitched. Something big was floating toward them. His blood ran cold. A power line. The flood had ripped down electrical poles, their cables still attached. Live wires sparking as they drifted through the water, and one was heading right for them. Logan's mind screamed for a solution. If the power line touched the water, if the current carried it too close, it would be over. No time, no second chances, just one move. Logan sucked in a sharp breath. "Buddy, go!" With a final desperate burst of strength, he shoved Buddy forward. The German Shepherd let out a startled yelp as he was propelled toward the water tower's ladder. Just as the power line slammed into the flood behind them, the world erupted in sparks, a flash of white-hot light. The water sizzled like fire meeting ice. Pain. Logan felt it shoot through his body, like 1,000 knives tearing him apart all at once. And then, darkness. Logan's body went limp. Buddy, now clinging to the ladder, turned, his dark eyes locking onto his human. Logan was floating, unmoving, the flood carrying him away. Buddy's ears pinned back. He was safe. He had made it. But Logan wasn't moving. The dog's chest heaved. Lightning flashed overhead. Buddy's gaze shifted from the ladder, his only refuge, to the man drifting away. Then, despite everything, despite the exhaustion, thus Buddy let go. With a powerful push, he launched himself back into the flood and swam after Logan. The flood was merciless. The moment Buddy let go of the ladder, the current seized him, pulling him down, dragging him toward the chaos that had already swallowed Logan. But Buddy didn't stop. His paws sliced through the freezing water, paddling harder than ever before. His chest burned with exhaustion, his legs screaming for relief. But he refused to slow down. Logan was out there, and Buddy would not lose him. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the destruction. The flood raged around them, carrying debris, twisted metal, shattered wood, broken signs. But Buddy weaved through it all, his instincts pushing him forward. Then, he saw him. Logan's lifeless body drifted in the current, his face barely above the water, his arms limp. Buddy's heart pounded. A deep primal instinct took over. He lunged forward, biting down on Logan's jacket with everything he had, his powerful jaws locked tight, refusing to let go. Logan didn't move, but Buddy wouldn't accept that. With a fierce pull, he began to drag Logan through the water. The current fought back, trying to tear them apart. But Buddy fought harder. Every muscle burned. His lungs screamed. But he did not stop. The water tower was still in sight, its ladder just out of reach. Buddy's body was giving out. He had nothing left, but he had to keep going. He kicked harder. Another surge forward. 5 feet away, his vision blurred. 3 feet. His chest heaved. 1 foot. Then, his teeth caught the ladder. With the last ounce of strength in his body, he bit down and held on. His paws scrambled against Logan's jacket, trying to push him up onto the ladder. But Logan was still unmoving. Buddy let out a weak, desperate whimper. Then, a gasp. Logan's body lurched. He coughed, spitting out water, his eyes flying open in shock. His body shuddered violently as he sucked in deep, ragged breaths. He was alive, and Buddy had saved him. Logan blinked in dazed confusion, struggling to make sense of where he was. His arms were weak, his head spinning. Then he felt something warm pressed against him. He turned, his gaze locking onto Buddy. The German Shepherd was shaking violently, his body barely holding on, his jaw still clenched around Logan's jacket. Logan's eyes widened. "Buddy!" His voice broke. Realization hit him like a tidal wave. Buddy had saved his life. Through unimaginable exhaustion, through pain, through pure will. Logan's heart clenched, but they weren't safe yet. Gritting his teeth, he forced his numb arms to move. He grabbed Buddy, lifting him onto the ladder first. Buddy didn't resist. He couldn't. He had given everything he had. With one final push, Logan climbed up after him, pulling them both onto the metal platform. They collapsed together, soaked, shivering, barely breathing, but alive. For a long time, they just lay there, side by side, staring up at the raging sky. The flood still churned below. The storm still raged above. But up here, they had found solid ground. Logan slowly turned his head, his throat tight with emotion. Buddy lay beside him, his sides rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. Logan reached out, running a trembling hand over his fur. "You saved me, Buddy," he whispered. His voice was thick with emotion. "You did it." Buddy let out a soft, exhausted whimper. Logan swallowed hard, blinking away the stinging in his eyes. Then, for the first time in hours, the rain began to slow, the winds eased, the storm's fury began to fade, and in the distance, the sound of helicopters. Logan lifted his head, his heart pounding with hope. Flashing lights cut through the fading storm. A rescue team, finally arriving. He turned to Buddy, his fingers tightening in the dog's fur. "We made it," he murmured, and as if understanding, Buddy's tail gave a weak wag. They had fought, they had survived, and now they were going home. As the rescue team approached, Logan let out a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Buddy. He had always known that German Shepherds were strong, but tonight he had witnessed something else. A heart bigger than fear, a courage deeper than the flood, and a loyalty that would never, ever break. If this inspiring tale has touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel so you never miss another incredible story. Every subscription and share not only supports our mission to bring you authentic, moving stories, but also fuels the spirit of hope and determination we all need. Let's spread the message of resilience, courage, and love together. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing many more life-changing stories with you in our upcoming videos.